The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of CNS Channel 6.
On Channel 6. I'm yours, Gail Teixeira, representing the parliamentary opposition and the People's Progressive Party Civic. This program of matters of public importance brings you information and discussions on issues and matters that of concern to you, the Guyanese public, every Thursday between 12:30 and 1:30, right here on Channel 6. As I've informed you in previous programs, the Office of the Leader of the Opposition is open from Monday to Saturday, Monday to Friday, whole day, from 9 to 5, and Saturday's half day. And of course, we're at 304 Church Street, between New Garden Street and Peter Rose, Queenstown, in the Queenstown area, on Church Street opposite the Border Cricket Ground. Our telephone number 225-3432. You're free to call and make appointments, or you're free to drop in and to volunteer, or just to come and raise matters that are of concern to you. And of course, Freedom Radio continues to operate. We're having some technical problems, and we hope that those have been fixed. 91.1 Demerara, 90.5 Berbice, and 90.7, of course, Essequibo, that's FM. And the Mirror newspaper continues to be free online. You can register to receive it at www.facebook.com/Weekend Mirror News. Well, today is the 237 days since the passage of the no confidence motion on December 21st, 2018. Imagine, 237 days, or 33 weeks and 6 days, or 7 months and 25 days. So a lot of time has passed since the no confidence motion was successfully voted on in the National Assembly. Today is also 147 days since March the 21st, or 21 days, March the 21st, or 4 months and 2 days when elections were due according to Article 1066 and 1067. So remember the Constitution, we've been going through this for the last 4 months and longer, that Article 106 talks about when a government is defeated by a no confidence motion, it should resign and hold elections within 3 months, or by extension of the National Assembly, the time can be extended by a vote of 2/3 majority of the elected members of Parliament. Well, nothing has happened. It's 147 days since March the 21st, and no election date has been announced, and the elections have been not held. And the President has not acted since December 21st to name a date for elections. Remember, it is only the President that can name a date for elections. Not GCOM, not you and I, not the Parliament, but the President. On previous programs, we went through in detail the Caribbean Court of Justice June 18th ruling and the consequential orders of July 12th, 2019. The July 12th, 2019, after the CCJ consequential orders, stated the same as June 18th ruling, but in even clearer words, that the elections must be held 3 months after our interpretation of June 18th, or by extension of the National Assembly by 2/3 vote of all elected members. The CCJ states in one of the paragraphs, upon the passage of this motion of no confidence in the government, the clear provisions of Article 106 immediately became engaged. The words immediately became engaged does not leave any room for speculation or discretion. We examined the President's addresses to the nation March the 15th, June the 18th, and July 12th, which all illustrated how his positions did not change despite the rulings of the local court, that is the High Court on January the 31st, 2019, and the Caribbean Court of Justice. The President, as you know, on August the 8th and the 9th, made it clear in a public statement that he and the Cabinet would not resign, and that he was not aware that the CCJ called on him to dissolve the National Assembly and name a date for elections. On August the 8th, he made it clear that he wanted a sanitized list. In other words, coded language, house-to-house registration first, then elections sometime thereafter. By our calculation of GCOM's own time frame dated March the 25th, 2019, after the March 21st deadline, this would be concluded after the first quarter of 2020. So the President has not deviated from his position up to last week, Thursday and Friday. That first, you had to have a sanitized list. Well, yesterday was as we all know, what the government wants. It wants to stay in power as long as possible, even though, remember, what triggered this whole thing was the government lost its mandate to govern at the local government elections on November the 12th. 90% of all the voters of Guyana are in those 8 local authorities. And when the PPPC won 65% of those votes, and the APNU lost to the PPP by 47,000 votes, and of course AFC lost to the PPP by 113,000 votes difference, then clearly the government had lost its mandate to govern. And the pillar upon which governments are formed is based on the will of the electorate, the voters. And so we brought a no confidence motion, which was successful, and in a vote to 33-32 defeated the government. The government had fallen. And so the government lost its mandate from the electorate, and it lost the confidence of the legislature. Both are required by a government to stay in office. Well, yesterday was a momentous day in that the Chief Justice gave her ruling on the case brought by Christopher Ram for house-to-house, calling for house-to-house registration to be halted, as it would collide with the Constitution, Article 106.6 and 106.7. And as well, it collided with the CCJ ruling and consequential orders on June the 18th and July the 12th, respectively. Firstly, the Chief Justice ruled that September 18th is not the deadline for elections, but that following the passage of the no confidence motion on December 21st, Article 106 was immediately engaged. So she's saying that she's not naming a date for election. However, she reverts back to the CCJ that the no confidence motion on the successful passage on December 21st immediately engaged Article 106, which is the same thing the CCJ says. That 90 days following the no confidence motion, March 21st, 2019, was the date for elections following the successful passage of the no confidence motion, which has not been extended by a 2/3 majority of the members of the National Assembly. Therefore, the government has been, and these are not her words, but it's logical deduction, that if the government should have had elections by March the 21st, and they were not held, and there was no extension for the period for government to continue, then the government has been illegal since March the 21st, 2019. Because, as I said, elections were not held, and no extension was sought in the National Assembly by the government. Therefore, the PPP has been generous in saying that the government would be illegal after September 18th, 2019. Based on the Chief Justice ruling, the APNU AFC government has been illegal since March 21st, 2019. Secondly, the Chief Justice ruled that the house-to-house registration by and as of itself is not unlawful or unconstitutional. However, the removal of names from the list based on people not being home, overseas, and the scrapping of the National Register of Registrants to create a new one, as was being done by GCOM, is illegal. So there's a clear distinction she's making between that the house-to-house registration is legal. However, the removal of names and obviously the threatening of people being locked up and the scrapping, that is the scrapping of the National Register of Registrants, is illegal. That the names of persons already registered and on the National Register of Registrants cannot be removed unless they die or they're no longer Guyanese. Commonwealth citizens, of course, who are here for 1 year, can be added to the list. She ruled that there was no residency requirement for Guyanese. Persons not registered can be registered through house-to-house registration or claims and objection. So for those of you who voted on November 12, 2018 and saw your name on the voted list and voted do not have to register in the house-to-house registration. You're within your right, according to the Chief Justice, to say to the GCOM people when they come around that you have been registered. You don't need to register again. In other words, your fingerprints and everything are in the data system already. For those who are 14 and above and who are not registered and are not on the, and those who are 18 above who are not on a voters list that they're aware of, they can be registered. And this can be done through house-to-house registration or by a period of claims and objections. Thirdly, the Chief Justice also ruled that house-to-house registry is not the only means to refresh the list, but also it can be done by other means that is available in law, such as claims and objections, and that the list is valid. She ruled that it is now up to GCOM to choose which option in the context of the time for elections, which were due since March 21st, 2019. And I again remind you, as I've done on several occasions, what the CCJ ruling said. And I quote from it because it's a very important section of the ruling of June the 12th. The CCJ says, quote, "The judiciary interprets the Constitution, but as we intimated in our earlier judgment, these particular provisions, Article 106.6 and 106.7, required no gloss on the part of the court in order to render them intelligible and workable." No gloss meaning they don't have to go into a long explanation for people to understand what the words mean. Their meaning, they go on to say, is clear, and it is the responsibility of the constitutional actors in Guyana to honor them. Who are the constitutional actors in Guyana? The President, the Cabinet, the Judiciary, the Legislature, and of course GCOM, because GCOM is a constitutional body. Upon the passage of a vote of no confidence, it goes on to say, upon the passage of a vote of no confidence, the article requires the resignation of the Cabinet, including the President. So this is what the Constitution says, and this is what the CCJ reiterates on June the 18th, and says on June the 18th, and reiterates on July the 11th. The article goes on to state, among other things, that notwithstanding such resignation, the government shall remain in office, and that an election shall be held within 3 months or such longer period as the National Assembly by resolution, supported by no less, not less, than 2/3 of the votes of all the elected members of the National Assembly determine. The CCJ went on to state that, quote, the Guyana Elections Commission has a responsibility to conduct that election, and GCOM too must abide by the provisions of the Constitution, that is, elections within 3 months. The CCJ said unequivocally that elections are due in the 3 months in accordance with Article 106, that with the passage of the no confidence motion, Article 106 was immediately engaged. And I keep repeating this because this is very important. Since the CCJ June 18th ruling, the President has not abided with the Caribbean Court of Justice and continues to violate the Constitution of Guyana. 1, the President and Cabinet have not resigned. 2, the President has not accepted that a caretaker government can exercise full powers to make decisions, cannot exercise full powers to make decisions, grant contracts and agreement as per norm. Monies are being squandered on projects with no adherence to procurement law, corruption scandals continue to multiply, and the productive sectors are in trouble. 3, the President has not named a date for the elections. And 4, the President has not dissolved the legislature. Normally, the President will announce a date for elections, and then he dissolves the Parliament. And of course, not just the Parliament, the regional democratic councils all have to be dissolved as well, because our elections are general and regional elections. We hold both at the same time. Last week, I had said that the government would be legal come September 18th, and no elections. Well, I said that and I was wrong, based on the Chief Justice ruling of yesterday. Apparently, the government, according to the Chief Justice, the government is already illegal. Remember, I said at the beginning today, August the 15th, It is 147 days since March the 21st, or 21 weeks, or 4 months and 2 days when elections are due according to Article 106.7. The government has been illegal all this time. Decisions made, money spent, agreements made, contracts given out, all of these will be under review after the elections, and we will continue to keep a very close eye on what is being done. Closer than we were, but close for now until whenever elections are being held. And after those elections, when we win government, these will all be under review from March 21st to whenever elections are held. I asked last week if Mr. Granger wanted to go down in history as one of the first leaders in a parliamentary democracy in any part of the world to defy a no-confidence motion legitimately passed and refuse to hold elections within the Constitution-required time frame. I asked if he's prepared to put this country again into a constitutional crisis, as happened on March the 21st. Will Guyana be the first English-speaking CARICOM country since Grenada's dictator Prime Minister Gary in the 70s to defy constitutional rule? And are we going to repeat the Burnham era of rigged elections to make sure a government stayed in power regardless of the will of the people? In fact, my dear friends, we are once again in a constitutional crisis. The government cannot remain in office in defiance of the Constitution and the Caribbean Court of Justice. This is a travesty unheard of in any democratic aspiring nation. All of the President, the APNU AFC government, and GCOM efforts thus far have been to extend the life of an illegal government as long as possible into 2020. In the light of the Chief Justice ruling yesterday, will Mr. Granger's government continue to grasp hold of power with their fingernails? How much longer can this government pretend to be legitimate when now a court, the High Court of Guyana, has declared it illegal? Rather, this is a usurper in government. It has no legitimacy to remain in office. We are now in a dictatorship. Only the people can stop this illegal caretaker government. Constitutional rule is now under siege. Over the last 8 months, GCOM has refused to prepare for elections. This is the first time that elections have not been held within the 90 days as required by the Constitution. In actual fact, it is GCOM during this period that has been an integral part of the subversion of constitutional rule in our country. Today is another important day. There will be a meeting of the fully constituted GCOM under the new chairmanship of retired Justice Claudette Singh. Apparently the meeting should be starting in about 10 minutes, I think. This is its first meeting in more than 2 months. Unfortunately, the meeting will commence during or shortly after this program ends, so we won't know what will transpire. However, GCOM will have to take into account and comply with the Chief Justice ruling of August 14th and the CCJ rulings of June 18th and July 12th. And of course, overriding all of that is the supreme law of Guyana, our Constitution, because none of these courts have amended the Constitution, went against what the Constitution says. They've all upheld the Guyana Constitution. Last week, I pointed out 2 options that can save Guyana from becoming a pariah state. One, if the court ruled on August the 14th that the house-to-house exercise must be halted, elections preparations started immediately, and elections be held as close as possible to the September 18th deadline. The court did not do so, but it did state, as I stated earlier, that as of March 21st, 2019, the government was illegal and gave GCOM the responsibility to decide which option of refreshing the voters list can be used in the context of Article 106, and that the 3 months, that is March 21st, has long passed. So the court has now put it to GCOM to choose which option It will choose to refresh the list, but it must take into context the present reality of Article 106.7. It cannot operate as if it's a normal cycle of verification of a voter's list. Secondly, the Guyana Elections Commission, this was the second option, that the Guyana Elections Commission decides to halt the house-to-house exercise by mid-August, that is today, and within 10 days commence a 3-week claims and objection period using the November 18th voters list. Elections could be held as soon as early as mid-October. We sincerely hope that GCOM and all the members of GCOM, including the government members of GCOM, will uphold the Constitution of Guyana and recognize that it is participating in a travesty as of December 21st to not hold elections within the requirements of Article 106.7. However, we know that the government members on the Commission have been very clear in expressing what the government wants and what the President wants. It is highly unlikely that the Granger caretaker government will deviate from its plan to remain in office for another year following the no-confidence motion. It may have a plan and may wish to hold to the plan. The issue of whether the people of this country, civil society, unions, professionals, workers, women, men, youth, religious leaders, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, and the political parties will allow this to happen, to sit back and allow a government to defy the Constitution of our country. Whichever way it chooses, the APNU AFC coalition caretaker government's days are numbered. It is whether the APNU AFC coalition wants to end its term of office with some dignity or to go down in history with a legacy of dictatorship and violation and subversion of the constitutional rule. And I'm sure that there are many APNU supporters and PNC supporters that do not agree with this position of their government. APNU AFC wants to drag the country and people into exhaustion, to demoralize them by this constant inaction and the ever-present question of when. When will elections be held? Everywhere you go, the question continues. I have spent the last 4 days in Region 1. I have been in Region 7. I have been walking around the streets of Georgetown. You go shopping, you go into a mall, you go into the market, you go into a supermarket. People stop you and they say when. You take a taxi. You go down the road and people stop you. When? When will elections be held? And so maybe Mr. Granger doesn't walk around like some of us. He jumps into his entourage of 9 vehicles with men with submachine guns and outriders on Harley Davidsons. And maybe he's divorced from the reality of Guyana. And many of his ministers are too. But the question is, when? And by this prolongation, first by the courts and back to the courts, and that we are sometimes feeling as if we're yo-yos. This is, as I call it, a psychops game. What is psychops? Psychological operations. Psychops, P-Y-S-C-H-O-P-S, is psychological operations. It is psychological games being played on the Guyanese people. But whoever is the mastermind of this game, they must understand that the Guyanese never gave up over the 28 years of Burnham and Hoyt, who denied their right to vote at free and fair elections. They never gave up in the face of Burnham's dictatorship, and neither shall we give up this time. Democracy, we've had the taste of democracy, and we don't want to lose it. We've had the taste of democracy and restoring democracy and amending our Constitution and strengthening our human rights sections. and levels of inclusivity and power sharing are built into our Constitution. After all that, what went before 28 years of rigged elections, 23 years of building the democracy under the PPC, we hadn't finished. But this embryonic democracy that we were building is so precious. We shall not give up this time. We shall not give up any time. We didn't give up before, and we shall not give up this time. I want to remind you of the preamble of our Constitution, which states, quote, "Forge a system of governance that promotes concerted effort and broad-based participation in national decision-making in order to develop a viable economy and a harmonious community based on democratic values, social justice, fundamental human rights, and the rule of law." Rule of law. So that's what our Constitution says in its preamble. And I believe that we must teach our children, especially in secondary school, to be cognizant of what our Constitution means. It is what guides our nation and sets out the framework for our democracy. And certainly over time, it will be amended from time to time as we grow and learn to overcome many issues. Again, the Constitution, Article 9, states that, quote, "Sovereignty." And what does sovereignty mean? Sovereignty means power, self-determination, control, authority. So it says the following: sovereignty belongs to the people, who exercise it through representatives and the democratic organs established by or under this Constitution. End of quote. How do we exercise this sovereignty as a people? We exercise our sovereignty, our control, our power, our self-determination through our right to elect representatives at periodic elections, whether local government, regional elections, or parliamentary elections. This is the right that the President is denying the Guyanese people, the Guyanese electorate now, for 147 days since March the 21st, 2019. It is Article 9, our sovereignty, our right to be governed by those who we elected, is being denied to us, the electorate, by Mr. Ranger. We assert our right under the Guyana Constitution to exercise our sovereignty and our power, and the demand that the President and the illegal government name a date for elections. We demand that GCOM moves with alacrity to prepare for elections. And we sincerely hope that GCOM today will stand fiercely in defense of our Constitution and carry out and abide with the constitutional requirements by the Guyana Elections Commission, a constitutional body. This is no time to sit on the fence, my dear friends. Are you on the side of constitutional rule and democracy, or are you on the side of a creeping dictatorship? Are you on the side of upholding the Constitution and having elections, or are you on the side of denying the people the right to hold elections and to have their voice and choice known, and a government of their choice being appointed? Today we're going to allow a lot of time for call-ins, and I hope that you will use the time. I see someone has been calling in quite a bit, and so I'm going to give him a first chance. So, let's see. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Matters of Public Importance. Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Go ahead and speak.
Oh, Mr. Shiro,
Yes.
I respect you to the highest. Well, you are a member from Saint Thierry Jargon, right?
I'm not that old.
Okay. Why are you allowing yourself to be pulled down by Barjagyo and his life? 3. When Janet Jagan throw it over her shoulders and do not think that it is good, so was she going against the Constitution? 4. All of us hear what the Chief Justice said yesterday and the CCJ. They never set a date. All they said in 3 months' time, we'll go to the Parliament and get it to the majority to extend. Barjagyo refused to go in Parliament. Yet, he has come to preach lies.
I don't know what is that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm asking callers, when you're calling, could you please deal with the background noise? You can't listen to yourself and be on TV at the same time. It gives a lot of reverberation here at this end. So please watch that when you call in. The issue of that keeps, I find it rather hilarious, the way in which the government and some of its supporters are cherry picking. 1997, there was an election. The chairman of GCOM announced the results of the election. The then opposition approached the court, but Mrs. Jagan was already sworn in before the official swearing in. And so when they brought the piece of paper to stop the swearing in, she had already been sworn in. And so the paper was thrown away. And so how does that compare to a government that has waited 7 months with no elections when they're required to hold one? 1997, there was an election. It was held. There was an announcement. The PNC then lost. It went to the courts, and the courts determined that even though some of the claims would not have vitiated the results of the elections, and this was made by Justice Claudette Singh, the new chairman of GCOM. The Parliament, before the 97 elections, had unanimously, government and opposition, PNC and PPP and United Force and WPA, and all agreed that we needed a new voter's ID card. And that was used in the 97 elections. After the PNC lost the elections, they went to the court to challenge the new voter's ID card. And Claudette Singh ruled that the voter's ID card was unconstitutional. But the results were not vitiated. 2 months after that ruling, which was 2001, elections were held. The court ruling was January, and the elections were held in March 2001. So the issue of Janet Jagan throwing a piece of paper over her back is really not of any comparison to now, my dear friends. I'm being brought down by Barry Jagdeo. That's your opinion. That's your opinion. You haven't shown how I'm being brought down by Barry Jagdeo. I'm a leader of the PPP. I've been there for a long time. I didn't start off with Chetty Jagan. I am not that old. When Chetty was formed the PPP, I was a little girl, a little child actually. And so I've been in the party for a long time, and I'm proud to be a member of the People's Progressive Party Civic, and I will never change my party affiliation, and everybody knows that. So that as we go on in age, we make place for younger people. And my role in the party is one that I cherish. One of being able to hold a position where I can guide and help bring the next generation of leaders up, as Janet Jagan and Chetty Jagan and others did to me when I joined the party and I was very young. So that it's a cycle we go through. Barry Jagan hasn't put me down, nor has anybody else. CJ's ruling, 2/3 majority, and Barry Jagdeo refusing. For the viewers' information, and we have raised it on this program, there is no dispute by the High Court on January the 31st, 2019, nor the CCJ of June the 18th, nor the CCJ constitutional orders of July the 12th, nor the High Court ruling of August the 14th, that elections should have been held by March the 21st, 90 days after the December 21st, 2018 no confidence motion. There is no dispute. They all agree on that. And the reason why they all agree is because the Constitution is absolutely clear on it. And I've read that section over and over again on this program as of today. But on March the 9th, Mr. Jagdeo, as leader of the opposition, wrote Mr. Granger as president, proposing that since GCOM had made no preparations for elections, had taken no positions, that we in the PPPC, as the parliamentary opposition, were offering a proposal that we would give our 2/3 majority for the elections to be held on or before April the 30th, 2019, when the voters' list would expire. We did that to prevent our country going to a constitutional crisis. We did that and we gave Mr. Granger a face-saving device because elections could not be held by March 21st. The president was holding out. And that, therefore, we proposed that elections, we would give the 2/3 majority to have elections on or before April 30th, with using the voters' list of November 12, 2018. The president was both in writing and across the table silent. He never had the decency to respond by saying no. He just ignored it. So when the person says that we're not giving her 2/3, we offered to give her 2/3 since March the 9th, and it was rebuffed by the president. The president also has not acted in good faith. He has not even indicated a date for elections. He has been consistent throughout in that elections, he will name a date for elections once the list is sanitized. And remember, he's the one who spoke about 200,000 incorrect entries on the list. And that when GCOM says it's prepared, having cleaned up the list, he is the one that said the list is flawed and needs to be sanitized. And so, what 2/3 are you talking about, Mr. Jacks, who called in? Suppose Mr. President comes up with a date for June 2020. Do you really expect any decent parliamentary opposition, forget about PPP, any opposition in any part of the world would support that? As I've said, it's 147 days past March the 21st. The government has had quite a bit of extra time. So that it is nice to try to bring down what we are doing. But you must ask, the only person under the Constitution that has the power to name a date for elections, only person, whether he names a date or he says, I'm proposing this date and I will take it to Parliament because we need a 2/3 majority. One cannot operate in a vacuum. There is no date. In the letter that Mr. Jagdeo wrote Mr. Granger on July the 20th, calling on Mr. Granger for the Cabinet and the President to resign in accordance with Article 106.6, to set up a caretaker government with limited powers, as required by the CCJ July 12th ruling, to dissolve the National Assembly and to name a date for elections. The President's response of April the 8th, the last time we met here, was that he was not aware that he had to dissolve Parliament or to name a date. So you tell me, what are we dealing with? It's no use beating up Jagdeo. The issue is you should be talking to the President, and particularly the PNC supporters should talk to the President, that what is being done is utter madness. and in total violation of the Constitution of our nation. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Matters of Public Importance.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Chair. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
The thing is, if there's a no confidence motion,
Right.
and you're going to have elections still next year at the APN, you would want it. So what's the purpose of a no confidence motion if that's what they want? It doesn't make sense.
Well, you're right.
Right? So it doesn't make sense to have a no confidence motion and the election is next year when it should have been held next year as usual, as regular. So it doesn't make sense having a no confidence motion. The APN, you need to retain their position and do what's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I wasn't clear where you were coming from, and then you made it very clear. Thank you. Yeah, the no confidence motions in parliamentary democracies are a fundamental part of parliamentary democracies. Fundamental part. Many no confidence motions don't succeed in the sense that they don't win the majority vote in order for it to go forward. So one could go through from the 1870s in many parts of the world to 2019, and you'll find that there were probably about 500 no confidence motions in various countries throughout the world. Majority of them never got the majority in Parliament to support it to defeat a government. However, there have been many instances, too, where the majority gave its vote for no confidence. And so you have the famous case of Margaret Thatcher as the leader of the opposition in the British Parliament in the 1970s, who brought a no confidence motion against the Callaghan Prime Minister Callaghan, sorry, and she won the vote by one vote alone. Elections were held, and she won, and she became the Prime Minister of England. And now remember, Margaret Thatcher was called the Iron Lady of the UK. Then you have a number of other cases, most recently in Spain, where the government was recently elected and went to Parliament. The opposition, they didn't have a big majority, and the opposition, with a coalition of a number of other parties in the opposition, brought a no confidence motion on the very first day of Parliament and knocked out the government that had just recently been elected. Elections have had to be reheld. And so that's the purpose. The no confidence motion is about, does the government have the mandate in the Parliament to control the Parliament to do its job as a government? If it loses that, then it cannot do that and therefore must hold elections. The Canadian Parliament has been a classic example of the number of no confidence motions that have succeeded over the last, say, 10 years and more, and in which no confidence motions have been brought, they have succeeded, there's election, and the guy who was booted out gets elected back with a minority. Then you have another no confidence motion against the same chap, and he loses at elections, and another guy comes in. And so that is a fundamental premise of democracy, that the government it's a concept of responsible and responsive government. Responsible government or responsive government is responsible to two areas: the electorate who put them there and the Parliament. It must retain the confidence of the Parliament, and when it doesn't, it falls and must have elections. So that you're right. Elections must be held when there's no confidence motion. I think the problem with the Parliament, the opposition, the government, is that it still cannot, 7 months later, get over the shock that the government has fallen. And therefore they're digging in their heels to stay in as long as possible. The problem is they're in a catch-22, in that the longer they do this, the longer they refuse to allow for elections, their popular support gets weaker. Their legacy gets weaker. And in fact, they're playing a very dangerous game if they have an interest of their party surviving elections in the future. As an opposition party, the PPPC, the People's Progressive Party, has been we have existed for 69 years. This is our 69th birthday this year. We have been in government, out of government, kicked out of government, put under house arrest, lost by rigged elections, got into government, out of government. Now we're vying to get back into government, and we will succeed. Because the longer this government plays with this game of pretending that it doesn't have to have elections, that somehow the no confidence motion can be wished away, or that somehow it is not obliged by the Constitution to obey, then this government is just digging its grave deeper and deeper. It may be able to hold on to power for quite a while, but at the end of it, APNU AFC coalition as an entity will be over. You cannot do this to the democratic framework of a country and get away with it. It does come back to slap you in the face. And many of the supporters of the APNU, AFC, PNC, WPA are not comfortable. They feel very embarrassed by all of this. And so the government and the president, as I said, the president is the one who determines when the date of the election is. And I want to repeat something we had discussed before, and I'm sure someone's going to call in on that issue, maybe not today. And that is that on August the 9th, 2014, that's 5 years ago, Mr. Nagamutu and Mrs. Cathy Hughes signed a no-confidence motion and submitted to the Parliament to go on the order paper. As normal, the Parliament went into recess on August the 10th. So there was a whole recess, August the 10th to October the 10th, as we are now in the same recess period. Automatically, every year it happens. There's a news clipping I kept with Mr. Granger in 2014, when the no-confidence motion was being mooted and discussed by Mr. Nagamutu and others, that APNU would not be supporting the removal of the government. However, by October, Mr. President Ramatar called on Mr. Granger, as the leader of opposition, to meet to have discussions on the way forward. The meetings did not take place. The President prorogued Parliament, and the Constitution allows the President to prorogue Parliament for a number of months, constitutionally. The President, in an address to the nation, Mr. Ramatar, stated that he hoped that in this period that Mr. Granger and himself could sit down and work out the way forward in the best interest of the nation. On December the 6th, Mr. Granger, publicly and in writing, conveyed the view that his party had no interest in having discussions with the President. In January 2015, President Ramatar announced that he would be announcing the election date. He then moved to dissolve Parliament, and elections were called for May the 11th, 2015, within 3 months of the date that he gave for dissolution. And that's what the Constitution requires in normal circumstances, 3 months from the time the President announced the date. However, in a no-confidence motion, whilst the 3 months still exist, the 3 months starts from the time the no-confidence motion was passed. Unlike under normal election schedule, it is 3 months from the time the President dissolves the Parliament. And so these are completely different situations. One, that a constitutional mechanism was used within the constitutional requirements by Mr. Ramatar as President. And we have, in contrast, Mr. Granger as President defying what the Constitution requires of him, and ignoring it at best and defying it at worst. And so we have to be, this is a rather interesting period in our history as a country, as a nation. Whilst people are suffering bread and butter issues, high taxation, high cost of living, 29,000 jobs lost, corruption, worsening health and education services, more blackouts, and so forth, at the same time, people are being asked to go beyond bread and butter issues and deal with what are complex issues and premises upon which democracy is based. And out of this experience, as bad as it looks now, our population, our electorate will be wiser, smarter, and more informed in regard to the importance of the democratic clothing that we wear. In other words, the constitutional cover that gives us the trappings of being a democratic nation. I want to also say that in that period when the prorogation of Parliament took place, that Guyana was denied 25 million, I think it was, euros from the European Union because of the prorogation. This was loan money. I sincerely hope that the Western powers, the European Union, the ABC, American, British, Canadians, the CARICOM, the OES, Organization of American States, the Commonwealth, are all taking note of this. Because as far as my research shows, and I'm not the expert on this, that there is no country I can think of, no democratic country I can think of, that has had a no-confidence motion and not held elections. In fact, a number of countries and a number of parties, political parties, even in government, who have faced a no-confidence motion, have been confident that they could win the elections. And they usually tend to want to have a snappy election to give the other guy as little time as possible. And that's because the date of the election is called by the president or prime minister, whoever is in the position of authority. You are seeing now in the British Parliament Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, who is the leading opposition, calling for a no-confidence motion with regard to a no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson has just become the Prime Minister, taking Theresa May's place. And the whole discussion there about what a no-confidence motion is and why it is a fundamental premise of parliamentary democracy. And so it'll be interesting to see what plays out there. But we have to think about, which country can you think about has had a no-confidence motion that was passed successfully and did not go to the polls? Refused to go to the polls. I can't think of any. I really can't think, and I have tried to go through my map in my brain of political parties and Commonwealth countries. You know, the countries that have defied this are classified as dictatorships, as governments that are dictatorships, that defy democracy and constitutional rule and the Commonwealth Charter, and so forth. So we are watching, and we are going to resist, and we're going to ensure that this government is not able to hold out and deny people the right to vote. They've had enough time. They've had a long time, and we've been very disciplined in this whole process. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Matters of Public Importance. Someone clicked off. So that we want to ensure that the people's voice is heard. The people's voice will be heard. We have overcome one thing by yesterday, that we were right on the house-to-house registration, in that if you're on the list already, you don't need to go and register again. If you don't happen to be in the country at this point, but your name is on the list, you don't have to go through a house-to-house registration. If you're living abroad and your name is on the list, you can either have it taken off by yourself in a claims objection period, or you don't come in for the elections, you don't fly in for the elections. But the court has ruled residency is not a requirement for a Guyanese citizen to vote. And therefore, we encourage people to make sure that they check on the voters list of November 12, 2018 to make sure their names are there. If their names are there, they do not need to vote to go and get registered at a house-to-house registration. And so we have gone through a lot of things today. We have talked about, one thing we talked about last week, which we didn't talk about today, and that is the exploitation of the Haitians in this country with the silence, if not collusion, of the Guyana government in watching the exploitation of thousands of people who are part of a human smuggling ring, and at worst could be human trafficking ring. And the government seems to be totally unconcerned that this is happening. And one has to ask why. I want to thank you for calling in, those of you who did, and to say that with each day that passes, that goes by without the election being called, the country suffers, the economy suffers, the people suffer. We lose. And that it is Mr. Granger who must do what is right and call the election date, so that we, the people, all the people, regardless of our ethnicity, our religion, our class, our gender, our geographic location, will all have the right to use the power, our sovereignty, to vote for the representatives who will lead our country over the next 5 years. We have to ensure that we're all ready for elections to save our nation, our people and children. I ask you to have a blessed week until we meet again right here on Matters of Public Importance next week from 12:30 to 1:30. And remember, as I always say, struggle we shall, and silent we shall not be. As we meet here today, there is a picketing going on in front of the Ministry of the Presidency by a civic organization. There was one before by the People's Progressive Party early this week on Tuesday. Silence is the greatest enemy to democracy. Silence makes those in power think they can get away with anything. Silence helps those who want more control and less democracy, those who want to move this beautiful nation of ours to a police state. And at the elections, we, the people, will make our votes count again. And we in the People's Progressive Party civic government shall have to start all over again, as in 1992, to reconstruct, to put this economy back on a firm and stable footing, to transform our economy and restore the programs which help the poor and vulnerable and those at risk, and restore the independence of the judiciary and legislature from executive interference. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care of each other. Remember, don't drink and drive, please. Please don't drink and drive. We want all our people to be healthy and alive and strong for the next few mornings until we have election. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.